My fiancée publicly humiliated me during dinner while I covered all our debts, so I ended the relationship and exposed everything to everyone present. I'm a 28-year-old guy who genuinely believed that real love meant enduring hard moments quietly to protect the relationship, even when it meant swallowing my own pride and pain. When my fiancée broke down one night, whispering through tears that her student loans and personal debts were crushing her, I stepped forward without hesitation and promised I would carry the weight for both of us. I took on every financial burden, telling myself this was what a devoted partner did when the woman he loved felt overwhelmed and scared. I started working overtime shifts, accepted extra freelance gigs, and learned to stretch every paycheck until it almost snapped. I remember staring at spreadsheets under the dull kitchen light, calculating rent, utilities, groceries, and her monthly payments while convincing myself this was temporary. She would cup my face and murmur, "You're so strong, you're the only one who's ever truly had my back," and those words soaked into me like validation I had waited my whole life to hear. In quiet moments on the couch, she'd smile and say, "I don't know what I'd do without you," and I felt something swell in my chest that felt dangerously close to purpose. I ignored the exhaustion in my bones and the permanent tension in my jaw because I believed love was supposed to hurt a little before it bloomed. I never once made her feel guilty or reminded her how hard I was working, because I trusted her emotional loyalty completely and thought guilt would poison the foundation we were building. I told myself that sacrifice was proof of commitment, that silence was strength, and that my patience would someday become our shared victory. Sitting beside her as she scrolled happily through wedding ideas, I honestly believed I was doing everything right. I started noticing the change so subtly that at first I thought I was imagining it, like a slow shift in the air before a storm you don't want to admit is coming. At our first small gathering with friends after the engagement, she laughed a little too loudly and said, "He's great, but honestly, he worries way too much about money," and everyone chuckled while my smile froze. I tried to brush it off, but the way her eyes lingered on me felt different, sharper, almost amused. On the ride home, I asked gently, "Did I do something wrong back there?" and she huffed, staring out the window, whispering, "You're so sensitive, it was just a joke, relax." Her words stung more than I expected, but I forced myself to nod, pretending I understood. Inside, though, something cracked, like the first quiet sound of glass giving way. Over the next few weeks, the comments became more frequent, more pointed. "You know, he's really not that ambitious," she said once at dinner with her cousin, waving her hand like she was dismissing an inconvenience, and I felt my stomach tighten. My inner voice kept trying to reason with me, "She's stressed, you're overthinking it, don't ruin this over nothing." Still, I remembered how she once admired my discipline, how she called my determination admirable, and wondered when admiration turned into mockery. At home, I'd watch her scroll through her phone, the cold blue glow lighting her face as she barely looked at me, and I'd feel an unfamiliar ache of rejection settle in my chest. "You're acting weird lately," I whispered one night, trying to keep my voice steady, and she snapped back, "You're just insecure, that's your problem." The words echoed in my mind long after she rolled over and turned her back to me. I lay there listening to the hum of the fan and the distant traffic outside, realizing the warmth she once gave me was cooling into indifference, and a quiet fear crept in, warning me that her respect for me was slipping away. The night of the engagement dinner arrived wrapped in bright lights and forced smiles, but deep down, my chest felt heavy, like I was carrying more than just nerves. The restaurant was crowded and warm, the clinking of glasses and low murmur of conversation mixing with soft background music that should have felt celebratory. Instead, I felt uneasy, watching her glide toward the table with effortless confidence while I adjusted my jacket and tried to steady my breathing. Her parents sat across from us, my parents by my side, and everyone was laughing politely as plates of steaming food were placed down. For a brief moment, I convinced myself I was safe, that maybe the tension I'd felt was just my imagination. Then she tilted her head, smirked slightly, and said, "You know, I still can't believe I'm marrying a guy who pinches pennies like an old man," her voice loud enough for every head near us to turn. A few awkward laughs followed, but the silence beneath them was sharp. "He'd probably negotiate the bill if he could," she added, rolling her eyes dramatically. I felt heat rush to my face as my mother's fork froze mid-air and my father slowly looked down at his plate. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the waiter announcing our orders. "Come on, don't be shy, tell them how you double-check every receipt like it's a crime scene," she teased, grinning at everyone like this was entertainment. I forced a weak chuckle, but my throat felt dry and tight. "Hey, that's not really fair," I murmured, trying to keep my tone calm, but she leaned back and shrugged. "Relax, it's the truth, isn't it?" she said dismissively, sipping her drink like she'd just delivered a punchline. Inside, I felt small, exposed, like my sacrifices had been twisted into flaws. As the chatter around us resumed, I stared down at my untouched food, my hands trembling slightly as I realized this wasn't playful teasing anymore. There was something colder in her eyes tonight, something that looked disturbingly close to satisfaction. Her voice didn't soften after that first blow, it sharpened. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table like she was settling in for a performance, and said, "Honestly, sometimes it feels like I'm the only one with real ambition," her eyes sliding toward me with a slow, deliberate glance. The silverware clinked awkwardly as conversation stuttered around us, but she continued anyway, clearly enjoying the attention. "I mean, look at our life," she laughed, gesturing vaguely. "If it were up to him, we'd still be living like broke students." My chest tightened so painfully it felt like the air in the room had thickened. I tried to interject, my voice barely steady. "Can we not do this here?" I whispered, my hands clenched under the table. She scoffed dramatically. "Do what?" "Tell the truth," she replied, her tone coated in sugary cruelty. "Everyone should know what they're getting into, right?" Her mother shifted uncomfortably, but didn't say a word. My father's jaw flexed, eyes darkening with something close to humiliation on my behalf. I could feel eyes crawling over me, weighing me, judging me, and a hot flush crept up my neck. She kept going, listing the ways I was too cautious, too slow, too old-fashioned, like she was reading from a script I'd never seen before. Inside, something fragile splintered. I remembered every night I skipped sleep, every meal I downgraded, every extra shift I begged for just to ease her burden. To hear it reduced to mockery felt like my devotion was being stomped into the restaurant floor. "You're embarrassing yourself," I muttered, desperate to salvage even a shred of dignity. She leaned back with a satisfied grin. "No," she said softly, eyes glittering, "I'm finally being honest." A thick, uncomfortable silence settled over our table, stretching so long it felt almost surreal. I stared at her, searching for the version of the woman who once whispered gratitude into my chest, and all I saw now was someone I no longer recognized, and the way her eyes lit up told me she wasn't finished yet. The drive home was silent, the kind of silence that pressed down on my ears until every thought felt louder than the engine. She stared out the window like I didn't exist, scrolling through her phone with calm indifference, while my mind replayed every word she'd thrown at me in public. "You took it too personally," she finally sighed, not even looking at me. "People joke at dinners. Stop acting like a victim." Her tone wasn't apologetic. It was annoyed. And somehow that hurt even more than the laughter. When we walked into our apartment, the air felt heavy, stale, like something rotten had been trapped there waiting for us. I tried to speak, tried to understand, but she brushed past me. "I'm tired." "We'll talk when you grow up," she muttered, disappearing into the bedroom. I stood there in the dim hallway, listening to the faint click of the door lock, realizing she'd shut me out like I was the problem. I don't know what pushed me to do it, maybe instinct, maybe desperation, but I walked toward her cluttered desk and opened the folder she always said was just paperwork. Inside were scattered bills, unopened envelopes, and a credit report partially hidden beneath a makeup bag. My heart began to race as my eyes skimmed the unfamiliar numbers, the overdue notices, the obsession-inducing red stamp screaming final warning. These weren't the debts I'd been paying. These were newer. Bigger. More reckless. My fingers trembled as I pulled out another statement, recognizing late fees, purchases I never approved, cards I'd never seen before. Confusion twisted into dread as reality settled in. Where did all this come from? I whispered aloud, though I already knew the answer would shatter whatever blind trust remains. Just then, the bedroom door creaked open behind me, and her voice floated across the room, sharp and cold. "What are you doing with my things?" I turned slowly, the papers still trembling in my hands, and for a second we just stared at each other like strangers caught mid-confession. "I was trying to understand why there are debts I've never seen before," I said, my voice shaking despite how hard I tried to steady it. She glanced at the documents, then back at my face, her expression hardening into something sharp and defensive. "You had no right to touch that," she snapped, stepping closer, her perfume now heavy and suffocating in the stale air. "You're always crossing boundaries." My heart pounded as I held up one of the statements. "These are maxed out, and they're recent." "What is this?" I asked, and my vision blurred with panic and frustration. She scoffed, rolling her eyes as if I'd just accused her of something trivial. "It's none of your business," she said coldly, yanking the papers from my fingers. "This is exactly why I tell people you're controlling." The word hit me like a blow. Controlling. I stared at her in disbelief. Controlling? I've literally paid everything so you wouldn't drown in debt. She laughed, a short cruel sound. "That's what you tell yourself. You use money to keep me dependent, to make me feel like I owe you," she said, her voice rising. "I've told my friends how you track every expense and guilt-trip me for spending a single dollar." I froze, the room suddenly spinning like the ground had dropped away beneath me. "You told them that?" I whispered. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "They all know how you really are. How suffocating you've become. How I feel trapped." Her words echoed off the walls, twisting my reality into something unrecognizable. I saw flashes of her laughing with her phone angled away from me, late-night texts, hushed conversations I never questioned. Was that what she'd been doing? Rewriting our story behind my back. "You've made me look like a monster," I said, my voice barely audible now. She crossed her arms, chin lifting just slightly. "If the shoe fits, maybe that says more about you than me." The silence that followed felt poisonous, thick with betrayal and suspicion, and as she turned away like I wasn't even worth arguing with, a sinking realization clawed through me. Maybe I didn't just lose her respect, maybe I had already lost the version of myself I thought she loved. I don't remember sitting down, only the coldness of the floor against my back as if my body had given up trying to stand. The apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in like they were listening to everything she'd just rewritten about me. I could still hear her footsteps moving around, the casual clatter of dishes like she hadn't just flipped my entire reality upside down. "You always overreact," she called from the kitchen, voice sharp but disturbingly calm. "This is why people think you're unstable." Unstable. The word looped in my head, mixing with controlling, suffocating, monster, like she'd been rehearsing this version of me for weeks. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to quiet the spiral, but my mind kept flashing to overtime shifts, the nights I skipped sleep, the meals I pretended didn't matter. I remembered her soft voice once saying, "You make me feel safe," and wondered when safety became a cage in her story. "Why would you tell them that?" I finally asked, my voice breaking as I pushed myself upright. "Why make me the villain when I've done everything for you?" She turned, resting her hip against the counter, arms crossed. "Because your everything came with silent pressure," she snapped. "You made me feel like I couldn't breathe without your approval." My chest tightened so hard it felt like my ribs might snap. "I only wanted to help you," I whispered. "You wanted control," she shot back, eyes cold. "And you hate that I'm finally speaking up." Speaking up. The phrase felt like a cruel joke when all I'd ever done was stay quiet. My thoughts raced in dizzy circles, self-doubt clawing its way in, poisoning every memory. Was I too much? Too intense? Did my care suffocate instead of protect? The questions churned until I barely recognized my own reflection in the darkened hallway mirror. She walked past me, brushing her shoulder against mine without apology. "You should be grateful I'm still here," she muttered. "Most women wouldn't tolerate someone like you." That was when something inside me cracked completely. Not anger. Not sadness. Just a hollow ache that felt like my heart had quietly shut down. I stood there frozen, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator and her dismissive footsteps fading away, as a terrifying thought crept into my mind: what if she actually believed this version of me more than the man I tried so hard to be? The next morning felt heavy and dull, like the world had lost its color overnight. I barely slept, just lay there staring at the ceiling as her breathing stayed slow and steady beside me, completely unaware, or unconcerned, that my chest felt like it had been crushed. When she finally sat up, she didn't even look at me. "You owe me an apology," she said flatly, scrolling through her phone as sunlight crept through the blinds. "You ruined the entire vibe last night with your mood." My throat tightened. I was humiliated, I whispered, the words tasting dry and fragile. "You torn me down in front of everyone." She scoffed. "You made it weird." "I was just being honest. If you can't handle feedback, that's not my problem." I stood in the doorway, watching her apply mascara like the night before never happened, her reflection sharp and confident while mine looked hollow and exhausted. "So that's it?" I asked. "You don't even care what that did to me?" She dropped the makeup brush and turned sharply. "Care? I care that you're suffocating me with your broken masculinity," she snapped. "You act like a victim to manipulate sympathy." The word manipulate felt like it pierced straight through me. I staggered back slightly, breathing shallow, vision blurring at the edges. I glanced down at my phone, noticing another overdraft alert from my bank, another reminder of how far I'd sunk for her comfort. The numbers stared back, almost mocking, confirming the slow death of my own stability. I walked to the bathroom and looked at my reflection. Sunken eyes. Pale skin. Shoulders slumped under invisible weight. I barely recognized myself. Was this the man who once believed love meant strength? I pressed my forehead against the cool mirror, my hands trembling as the weight of everything finally crushed through me. From behind the door, her voice floated lazy and sharp. "If you don't fix your attitude, I swear I'll call off the wedding." That was it. The lowest point. Not the humiliation. Not the lies. But the threat wrapped in indifference. And as I stood there, breathing in the stale air, staring at the man who had given everything and still wasn't enough, a quiet, broken certainty settled in my chest. This wasn't love. And I didn't know how much more of this I could survive. I didn't announce anything. I didn't argue. I didn't even look at her again that morning. Something inside me went quiet, the kind of silence that isn't peace, but preparation. I watched her move around the apartment, humming to herself, checking her phone, existing like I hadn't just been emotionally shattered at her feet. And for the first time, instead of aching to fix things, I felt a slow, unfamiliar clarity settle in. I waited until late afternoon when she left to clear her head, her choice of words still echoing bitterly in my mind. The door clicked shut, and the air felt different, like I could finally breathe without her narrative suffocating me. I walked through our apartment slowly, noticing everything I had paid for, the couch I worked double shifts for, the expensive lamp she begged for, the coffee machine I bought because she said it made her feel classy. Each object suddenly felt like silent evidence. My hands trembled as I opened my laptop and logged into our shared accounts, my heart beating too fast for my chest. I reviewed statements, saved screenshots, and downloaded every transaction that didn't make sense, every hidden charge, every unexplained withdrawal. "You're not crazy," I muttered to myself, the words feeling desperate but grounding. The faint ticking of the wall clock filled the room, each second reinforcing that this was real. I opened my messages and scrolled through her conversations I'd never questioned before, now reading them with new eyes. "He's so obsessive," one message read, "but at least he pays for everything." My stomach dropped as another text flashed across the screen. "Once we're married, he won't have a choice anyway." I closed my eyes as a cold wave of dread washed over me, not just from betrayal, but from the realization of how calculated it all was. I looked around the room, at the life I thought we built together, and felt an eerie calm replace the chaos. I wasn't planning revenge. Not yet. But I was planning clarity. And as the sunset painted long shadows across the floor and her car lights finally pulled back into the driveway, I silently shut the laptop, knowing my next move would change everything. She came in that evening like nothing had shifted, keys clattering onto the counter, phone still glued to her hand as she kicked off her shoes. "You've been weird all day," she commented casually, barely glancing at me. "Still sulking?" Her voice carried that familiar blend of boredom and superiority, and for a split second, the old instinct to explain myself tried to resurface. But it stopped. I kept my face neutral, my heartbeat steady, like I was observing her from outside my own body. "I've just been thinking," I said quietly. She smirked. "About what?" "How sorry you should be." The arrogance in her tone burned, but I swallowed it down. "About what kind of future we're actually walking into," I replied, meeting her eyes for once without flinching. There was a flicker of something there, confusion, maybe even a trace of unease, before she masked it with irritation. "Don't start," she snapped. "I'm not dealing with another emotional spiral." I turned away before she could see the tension in my jaw and walked to the window, watching the city lights blur against the dusk. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and when I checked it, a message from one of her friends lit the screen. "Are you okay?" She said, "You freaked out again and scared everyone." The lie sat there, bold and casual, like it had already been perfectly rehearsed. I felt a strange chill spread through my chest, knowing she'd already started rewriting the narrative again, planting her version of events in the minds of people who once smiled at me. "She's already poisoning the story," I thought, my pulse tightening as I stared at the message. Behind me, I heard her open a drink and settle onto the couch like the queen of a kingdom she'd built on my quiet obedience. "You know," she said lazily, "if you keep acting like this, I might rethink the wedding. I deserve a man who doesn't question me over every little thing." I clenched my fist gently at my side, the urge to finally speak up fighting the instinct to stay silent. She thought she was in control. She thought I was still broken. But as I slipped my phone back into my pocket, a slow, deliberate thought took root. What would happen if everyone finally heard the truth? And for the first time since this nightmare began, the fear inside me shifted into something dangerously close to purpose. I didn't confront her that night. I asked her calmly if we could go back to the restaurant the next evening, the same place, the same table, just to talk things through like adults. She agreed instantly, a smug little smile tugging at her lips as she said, "Good, maybe you'll finally learn how to behave in public." I nodded, even though every cell in my body burned with the knowledge she had no idea what was coming. The next day felt unreal, like walking through fog with sharp glass under my feet. I barely spoke, barely ate, just focused on making sure every screenshot was backed up, every statement organized, every message saved. Her words echoed in my head as if she were still narrating my character, insecure, controlling, unstable. I wondered how easily love could transform into character assassination when power shifted hands. When we arrived at the restaurant, the air felt electric with forced politeness. Both families were already seated, smiling, unaware, the same way they had been before the humiliation that changed everything. She leaned in and whispered, "Try not to embarrass me again," before settling into her chair like nothing had ever happened. I felt my pulse thunder as the waiter poured water, as laughter filled the air, as her sister joked about wedding colors, all of them building a stage I hadn't asked for, but was finally ready to use. My fingers brushed the edge of my phone in my pocket, the weight of truth resting against my palm like a promise. Halfway through the appetizers, she let out a soft, amused laugh and said, "Look at him, so quiet tonight, maybe he finally realized how dramatic he's been." A few awkward chuckles rippled around the table, and the old version of me would have shrunk back, swallowed it, tried to repair the tension. But I didn't. I straightened slowly in my seat, heart racing, and felt every eye turn toward me. The overhead lights reflected off polished silverware, casting soft glows over faces that had no idea their illusion was seconds away from shattering. Her eyes narrowed slightly, sensing something shift in the atmosphere. "Actually," I said, my voice steady but sharp with buried truth, "I think everyone deserves to hear what's been happening behind closed doors." A silence fell, thick and heavy, stretching across the table as her confident expression flickered for the first time. And that's when I reached for my phone.